Hello everyone. This is the 41 part of the story, Magical Journey in Harry Potter World. Chapter 113, Three-Way Mexican Standoff. Is everyone ready? Asked Rivers, putting on his Novellus Axionite robe and throwing away the Hogwarts uniform. He looked at the soon-to-be-dead grunts and saw that they were still putting on their clothes. Hurry up, we need to get out of here and get to Hogsmeade, urged Rivers and looked at the watch on his wrist. Soon, the friends of Potter will realize he's missing. After everybody changed into their robes, Rivers ordered. One of you will be at the back with me, while two others will carry Potter. Levitate him, and let's get going. Two pulled out their wands and targeted the ropes around Harry's body and levitated him off the ground. With Rivers at the back, the four with an unconscious Harry started to walk towards the shrieking shack. The grunt in front raised his wand to cast the wand lighting charm, Lumos. With the three guys in front of Rivers, their shadows hid Rivers' expression in the darkness, who looked at them with an apathetic expression. Scene break. Where is Harry? Asked Ron as Fred and George entered the Gryffindor common room through the portrait entrance guarded by the fat lady. We don't know, he suddenly disappeared. We think he's pulling a joke. We think he used the invisibility cloak to get past us. Sneaky boy. When Oliver came out of the stadium, he came out alone. When Fred and George asked about Harry, Oliver said he thought Harry was waiting with them because he didn't see Harry in the locker room. Fred and George had been pulling practical jokes on people before Harry came to Hogwarts. When Harry came along, he showed his invisibility cloak to the Weasley twins, and it seemed to open up the possibilities. Harry and the Jester twins often collaborated to pull practical jokes on the students. After Harry didn't come out with Oliver, they thought Harry had used the invisibility cloak to get past them. That doesn't sound right. Harry couldn't have used the cloak, said Ivy, who was sitting beside Ron along with Hermione. She frowned in confusion and explained. Today is my day with the cloak. Harry has the map while I have the cloak. She opened her book bag and took out the folded silvery fabric cloak. I have it right here. Fred and George looked at each other before smiling as if they understood everything. You're kidding, too, aren't you? Harry must have come here, and he's given you that to make us confused. They walked towards Ivy, kneeled in front of her, and patted her shoulder in unison. To think you would be pulling jokes, too. We are very proud of you. We will look forward to working with you. Satisfied with their reasoning, the twins got up and walked towards their dorms to take a shower. The three members of the Golden Squad looked at each other in confusion. Do you have any idea where Harry is? Asked Ron, looking at his two companions. Probably somewhere pulling a joke on someone, humphed Hermione. The bushy-haired girl still didn't approve of her friend's jester antics. He'll be back in a while. After saying that, Hermione went back to studying. Ivy and Ron also thought that Harry was pulling a joke on someone and went back to their own things. If only they had the Marauders map. They would have seen that the map didn't show Harry's position. Scene break. I'll say this. Really, listen to me, laughed James as he snacked on pigs in blanket as the three Marauders drank. Tell me, what are the three magical words? I love you, answered Remus, a light smile on his lips while feeling a little drunk. Let's have sex, shouted Sirius, already having drunk what James and Remus had. No. Let's have sex doesn't work, chuckled James and then pointed at Remus. Yes, it's I love you. Those are the words. He giggled before saying. I've been married for 15 years. I'm telling you. When you are married this long, the magical words are no longer, I love you. They change from I love you to I told you. Lily says, I told you more than I love you. After having said that, James laughed loudly at his own joke. And even though Sirius and Remus didn't understand it, they too laughed because they were a little tipsy. As Remus laughed, his eyes widened as he felt something familiar come up. He looked at James and Remus and blurted. It's happening. Ready yourselves. James and Sirius immediately sobered up and stood up from their spots. As James vanished the glasses, Sirius pocketed the bottles. Both of them stepped back and got ready to transform into their animagus forms. Werewolf instincts didn't flare when surrounded by animals. They would still be feral, but as long as the animals didn't threaten the transformed lycanthrope, they wouldn't attack animals. While Remus had already taken the wolfsbane, there was no harm in being cautious. Remus transformed, his body started to shake with violent tremors. Remus' head lengthened and also his body. His shoulders hunched. His hair sprouted visibly on his face and hands, which curled into clawed paws. But then, as the werewolf reared, snapping its long jaws, the door of the secret entrance that connected the shrieking shack and the whomping willow opened up. The two senior auras and the in-control werewolf looked at the door and saw 4 people barge into the room. The man in front had a wand out and pointing forward. When he saw people in the room, he yelled out to his companions. "There are people in here!" "What?" came out an exclamation from the back as the people entered the room. Suddenly, the room became crowded as everyone took out their wands and pointed at each other. There was a loud thump when the new people, the Axionites, pointed their wands at James, Sirius, and Remus. "With my authority as an aura, I order you to drop your wands," commanded James as he wielded his wand at the intruders. His mind rapidly worked as he thought about his current location, the door they had entered through, and what this all meant. They came from Hogwarts, thought James, and glanced at Sirius, who nodded, showing that he understood what was happening. The lighting in the room was insufficient because of the boarded-up windows. Only the candle on the floor illuminated the room. So it took a brief moment for one of the Axionites to finally notice Remus. Werewolf. There is a fucking werewolf in here. Shit, the Axionite screamed and pointed his wand straight at Remus. And as this was happening, Sirius observed the intruders, and his eyes caught something on the floor. At first, he thought it was a sack, but when he looked carefully, he saw there was a person tied up. And when the person who freaked out seeing Remus moved, he saw the person's forehead. Sirius' eyes widened to the limit, and he yelled. "James, they have Harry. These bastards kidnapped Harry." "What?" thundered James, while furiously glaring at the intruders. Rivers, who was standing close to the door, positioned himself near Harry's bound body. He looked at the 3 people who weren't from his group. James Potter and Sirius Black. What are they doing here? He quickly thought and then looked at the third one. And a werewolf. This isn't making any sense. Rivers deduced that the werewolf was on wolfsbane potion because he wasn't attacking anyone. He flinched when the werewolf growled at him threateningly with a savage glare in his eyes. Still very dangerous, he thought, and started to think of a plan. 3 on 3, I can get out of here. Yes, I can get out here, thought Rivers, and immediately moved. He swung his wand, and Harry's bound body flew up. Rivers levitated the body of the child that had a small build, of course, one suitable for playing Seeker. He then held it in front of him while pointing his wand at Harry's neck. "No sudden moves, or the boy who lived is dead," threatened Rivers, and then addressed his other companions. "Point your wands at the 3, and immobilize them if any one of them moves as much as a squeak." Rivers understood that he had the best possible hostage he could have had in this situation. James Potter and Sirius Black wouldn't move a single bit as long as he had Harry Potter in his hands. And even though he wasn't sure about the werewolf, he could see that it was restrained and cautious. "Keep a strong stand. This is for the Dark Lord. We will avenge him today. It'll be glorious," announced Rivers. He said that to make sure his meat shields were motivated and didn't surrender. "This moment will go down in the annals of history. We will trump the likes of Lestrange and become his greatest followers." And his words seemed to do the work. Of course, he knew they would work. He had selected these 3 because they were the most fanatic of the followers. They had donated frequently amounts that were surprising given each of their salaries. Rivers had done his research when he chose them. He knew that they could be manipulated with a few words, and given their personalities, they would stay devoted and loyal under situations like the current one. You are one of those Novellus Axionite shits," snarled Sirius as he gripped his wand tighter but didn't move because Harry could be in mortal danger. "Yes, we are the most devoted followers of the Dark Lord. We are the messengers who will spread his teachings far and wide. We will erase the filth and give rise to true justice," replied Rivers fanatically. The truth was that Rivers didn't give a shit about Voldemort. Voldemort and his ideology was simply something he used because it would allow to further his goals. Rivers Locke had spent his entire life hiding his true personality. He had created novellus actionites so he could let loose and let his true self play out a bit. He wanted to manipulate and scheme. He craved to influence people in a way that wouldn't be seen as the norm to society. Rivers Locke wanted to spread chaos among the people who tied themselves in fake notions of morals and laws. He wished to disrupt the norm and spread the seed of turmoil, discord, and disorder. To do that, he needed laborers who would help him out. He needed people who would become his pawns and do his bidding while he sat back and watched. So he used something that would give him the quickest and most results. He used the influence of the now-dead Dark Lord. Appealing the young and brash. Calling out to their fake superiority, fanning their pureblood egos to make them believe that they were doing something of great importance. In actuality, Rivers was a man of wisdom, intelligence, and intellect. He didn't believe in pureblood supremacy and would spit on it if it didn't put him at a disadvantage. He only believed in one power, and that was intelligence. Rivers believed that if one had sufficient intellect, they could take down anyone. If you were unrivaled in terms of brainpower, even the strongest wizards and witches wouldn't do anything but submit. And Rivers had proved it by controlling many people without ever putting himself in the sights of authorities. Rivers Locke only wanted one thing. He wanted to see the world burn and look down at it burning like a god hidden in the shadows while controlling everything and everybody. This situation wasn't great, but Rivers wasn't going to let himself fail here. He had Harry Potter, the savior of the wizarding world, in his hands. The death of the boy who lived would sow enough chaos to satisfy Rivers' soul. I'm the smartest man in the room. I can get out of here unharmed. Cover me, we're going to get out of here and complete our mission, ordered Rivers while moving behind his 3 meat shields. The marauders couldn't do anything with Harry being held hostage. All 3 men would have thought better if the hostage hadn't been Harry, but right now, all 3 were drawing a blank in worry. As Rivers' group moved towards the door that led out of the room towards the main entrance of the shack, it suddenly opened up. Every single person immediately tensed up and looked at the door. Oh. Scene break. Quinn opened the door of the room that had the entrance to the passage. And, oh boy, he wasn't expecting what was waiting inside. He stared at 7 people and... Is that Harry Potter? One bound and unconscious Harry Potter being used as what seemed to be a hostage. Quinn almost did a double take when he saw a werewolf in the room. Oh, for magic's sake. Today's a full moon, he exclaimed in his mind and knew this was Remus Lupin in his lichen form. What the hell is he doing here? Shouldn't he be in his residence sleeping? Quinn had monitored Remus on a few full moon nights. Remus, who had been getting his wolfsbane potion, didn't come to Shrieking Shack. He had enough control to just sleep in his residence inside Hogwarts. Then he looked at James Potter and Sirius Black and pieced together that these 2 were the reason for Remus' sudden change of location. And finally, Quinn looked at 4 people who were in the middle of the room. Whoa, they've kidnapped Harry. Now that's more than anyone has ever accomplished, thought Quinn. They're the novellus actionites. Yep, I'm pretty sure they are. He thought all of this within a few seconds, and after Quinn was done with speculating and observing, he said, Oh. Quinn didn't remove his left hand from the doorknob and raised his right hand to point a thumb back. Excuse me? I feel like I'm interrupting something important. How about I leave you to your thing here and let you continue? Yes, I'll do that, said Quinn and very slowly stepped back and tried to close the door. Trying to get out of the place so it won't turn into a Mexican standoff. Don't close that door. Kid, if you don't want to get hurt, I suggest that you do whatever I ask you to do, yelled Rivers, who stopped Quinn from closing the door. Rivers was slowly getting frustrated. This situation was already tough, but now, some kid had strolled into the situation and made things a little more complicated. Just how many people know about this secret passage, thought Rivers furiously. The matchup was 4-on-3, and he couldn't let it turn into 4-on-4, so he tried to intimidate Quinn. You see who I'm holding? This is Harry Potter, the boy who lived. If you don't do as I say, I'm going to blow up his brains. You don't want to be the person who let the boy who lived die, do you? Said Rivers, trying to make sure Quinn didn't make any erratic moves. See the man on the left? He's James Potter, the father of Harry Potter. If you don't do as I saw, I will kill his son, and he will blame you. You'll let his precious son die. Let me tell you something. James Potter here is a senior aura and has a seat on Wizengamot, and that makes him a powerful man. He can ruin your family and put you in Azkaban, and you don't want that, do you? Quinn shook his head in response. There's no way in hell he could do that. If I was arrested, I'd be out before they could even think of harming me. George West would tear down the ministry walls if he ever heard that his grandson was under arrest. The richest man in the country and probably the magical world would bring down hell if he heard a word about putting Quinn in Azkaban. If Death Eaters were able to bribe their way out, George could do much, much more. Not only would George get Quinn out, but he would also cause massive problems for anyone involved. George would put so much pressure on the ministry higher-ups that they would have no choice but to tread very, very lightly, because their future would very well depend on their next decisions. Sure, James Potter was politically powerful, but George West was on another level. James Potter could gather the support of the Light faction, but George West could buy out the Grey and Dark factions and even get his hands on some of the Light faction. But of course, Rivers didn't know that the random kid he was threatening had such a background. And Quinn wasn't about to whip his background out. It wasn't time for that. He had different plans for the current situation. When Quinn shook his head, Rivers internally smiled and said, "Now back off and move to the side with your hands raised above your head. I don't want you reaching for your wand." Quinn raised his hands above his head and walked back as instructed, moving sideways, out of the view of everyone but Rivers. He showed complete compliance. Rivers nodded and slowly moved forward towards the open door while his grunts covered him. Quinn stared at Rivers with a silent gaze and waited for an opportunity. Just a little more and it will be the time. They were still behind the threshold of the door the moment Rivers got out of the room, as his grunts were still behind and bunched up. It's time, thought Quinn. Suddenly the wand in Rivers' hands went flying. Right after, the door snapped closed. Quinn lowered his hand and ran towards Rivers. He used magic to pull on Harry's binding to separate him from Rivers. Rivers became too stunned/shocked at the sudden change of events. He couldn't help but look to his side just to feel a kick planted in his stomach. The force of the kick knocked the air out of him and he immediately knelt. The next second, he once again felt a kick, this time in his chest, and it made him lie on the ground. Suffering from panic, he looked through his shaky vision and saw Quinn as he descended on top of him. Then he felt his arms being trapped under Quinn's knees. "This will hurt, so brace yourself," said Quinn and raised his fist and brought it down onto Rivers' face. The solid fist impacted Rivers' jaw and cheeks, making a sickening sound. Scene break. As soon as the door closed, the marauders took action. They raised their wands and shot spells on the Axionite grunts. The grunts were surprised to see their path cut off, and in that lapse of concentration and focus, they were hit with spells. It was over for them. The auras and the lycanthropes stunned and bound their opponents within seconds, while using extra power just to make sure they wouldn't be waking anytime soon. The second the grunts' wands were retrieved, the three men ran towards the door, but when they opened the closed door, they were greeted with a shocking sight. In front of them was Harry's unconscious body. James immediately moved towards his son to check upon him. And on the side, Sirius and Remus saw the kid that had barged in standing up on top of the Novellus Axionite who led the others. It shocked them to see him raining punches on the Axionite's face. Then they heard him speak. "Damn it! My knuckles hurt. Oh, Rowena, I haven't punched anyone without gloves before and it hurts." They saw as the kid looked down. He then shrugged his shoulders and elbowed the Axionite in the face. Sirius moved to stop the kid, but the kid stopped on his own and stood up. Sirius, who was closer to the kind, saw the blooded face of the Axionite. And from the looks of it, he was completely and totally out. Sirius looked up and saw that the teenager was facing him. He was scrunching his face and raised his hands to look at them. "I think I injured my hands. This really hurt. I definitely need to go to Madame Pomfrey. They don't look well." The tense situation inside the Shrieking Shack had come to a sudden and dramatic end. Chapter 114, Potter's Thoughts and Time Before Meeting. "I think I injured my hands. This really hurts. I definitely need to go to Madame Pomfrey. They don't look well," said Quinn with his arms raised in front of him and his hands hung limply from below the wrist area. "Who are you?" asked Sirius Black, while moving his eyes from Quinn to the blooded face and back to Quinn. "And what are you doing here?" Quinn weaved magic into his hands and numbed the pain. He didn't attempt to heal his battered-up hands and only stuck to eliminating the pain from his injured knuckles and wrist. "Oh, I'm Quinn West, a fourth-year student at Hogwarts," introduced Quinn while scrunching up his face to portray that he was feeling pain. He then focused on the werewolf in the room and said, "Professor Lupin might know me from his classes." Sirius, Remus, and even James, who was checking up on his son, widened their eyes when they heard Quinn address Remus in his werewolf form as Professor Lupin. "What are you talking about?" uttered Sirius, while trying to separate Remus Lupin from the werewolf that stood beside him. "Oh, please. I already know that Professor Lupin is a werewolf," scoffed Quinn and turned his head to look at the lycanthrope. The signs were all there. He disappeared for a few days because of weak health, and the absence period was always after the full moon. Quinn then brought in the statement that would close this line of conversation. Professor Snape tried really hard to point out that Professor Lupin is a werewolf. The preparation he did for the werewolf revision lesson was outstanding. For once, he was completely involved in teaching. He even asked if any one of us had doubts, shrugged Quinn, and then finished with a smile. It was an unusual yet fascinating day. It made me think that people can accomplish anything if they put their hearts into it. "What? That snake did that," exclaimed Sirius, his hands tightening into fists at the thought of Snape trying to out his friend. "I'll blast him when I see that twat." Werewolf Remus put his hairy paw on Sirius to wind his friend down. After calming down, Sirius continued the conversation. "If you knew, why didn't you tell anyone?" He paused and then slowly asked. "Did you tell anyone?" "I didn't tell anyone. When I realized that Professor Lupin was a werewolf, I gave it a thought. Then I realized that if Professor was allowed to work here, then he must have been provided a supply of wolfsbane," said Quinn, and then glanced at Remus. "From the looks of it, he's on the wolfsbane. Or else, he would have already tried to bite me." Werewolves, when transformed, had the instinct to bite anyone they could get their paws on. The average werewolf didn't aim to kill. Their wild instinct knew that the only way to continue their race was to turn other people into werewolves, so the damage that a werewolf would do was a few bites. Sometimes, the bites would be at some of the body's vital spots, and the victim could die because of blood loss and shock. Of course, there were exceptions like Fenrir Greyback, who had that innate desire to kill and slaughter at times. "Aren't you scared?" asked Sirius. Sirius knew from experience that werewolves were proper people and not monsters. He knew better than anyone that, even though werewolves were dangerous, a lot of them tried hard to live normally and had hopes and dreams like everyone else. But he asked because there was always a risk. He still asked, even with Remus right beside him. And Remus didn't mind because he understood where the question was coming from and was curious about Quinn's answer. "Scared? No. I was cautious, not scared. I prepared myself and made sure that if one day Professor Lupin stood in front of me in his current form, I'd be ready," smiled Quinn as he unveiled his magic prep. "I know the Hermorphous Charm and have practiced it a lot to get it down on my fingertips." The Hermorphous Charm was a charm used to temporarily change a transformed werewolf back into their human form. It would forcibly turn back the transformation and would revert the werewolf into a human. Quite valuable for stopping a werewolf in its tracks. In the room's darkness, Quinn's expression wasn't clearly visible. But Quinn was looking at Werewolf Remus as he was a test subject. He was thinking about how the spell would work against a werewolf. Because the spell only temporarily reverted the transformation, the lichen transformation would come back very shortly. But that small window was enough to incapacitate the werewolf. However, Quinn's usage was a tad bit too powerful than your average user. His spell's effects would linger instead of ending after a bit. And that would cause a tussle between the lichen transformation and Quinn's magic. Even though Quinn hadn't tested it out against a real werewolf, he, at some level, was sure that the tussle between the transformation and his magic would be very painful for the target. Two opposing forces trying to forcibly change a person's body wasn't optimal, and it would, in normal circumstances, cause immense pain. As Quinn finished his thinking, James spoke for the first time and informed everybody of Harry's condition. "Harry's fine. He's just knocked out. I checked for the basic signs, but we should send him to Madame Pomfrey just to be sure," informed James with his eyes still on his son. "All right, then let's divide the tasks," nodded Sirius and looked at everyone in the room. "I will take these shits to Holdings and see if I can get something worthwhile out of them. James, you take Harry, and Quinn to Madame Pomfrey and inform Dumbledore of what happened here. Remus, you stay here. I know this isn't good for your body, so take a rest and go to sleep." Sirius took the lead and assigned everyone their tasks. All the conscious people nodded in consent and understanding. Scene break. James Potter, with Harry Potter on his back, walked with Quinn. They made their way through the secret tunnel that connected Shrieking Shack and Whomping Willow Tree. Harry was still unconscious while Quinn's hands were still injured. Sirius and James had tried to offer to cast healing spells on him, but Quinn had politely refused and said that he could wait for Poppy, the Medi-healer, to take a look at them. "Why do you know about this passage?" initiated James to fill the very silent underground passage with conversation. "Oh, I found it a few years back when I tried to get a good look at the Whomping Willow. Saw it when I finally figured out that I needed to shoot a pocking hex at the knot at the base of the tree to make it calm down. The Whomping Willow would attack anyone who would come closer, but if you pressed the knot at the base of its trunk, the magical tree would calm down for a while. Pomona Sprout used this method when she needed to check if the Whomping Willow was healthy, and so did Quinn when he needed to use the secret passage." "I know that, too," smiled James as he reminisced about the later of his school years when the marauders would sneak in after Remus to keep him company. The elder Potter glanced at Quinn while wondering whether he should say it or not. He, then, decided to say it. "Quinn, about the thing that person said about me doing those things to you and your family," said James carefully. "None of those words hold any truth. I would never do any of that. Those actions wouldn't be ethical, and no matter what could have happened back there, I would have never blamed you for any of it." James wanted to erase the thought that auras would take advantage of their position. Auras were the people who withheld justice, and he wanted to make sure that a child around the same as his son wouldn't build a negative image. "Don't worry about it. I actually don't care about the threat," smiled Quinn. "Even if things went south and you developed a grudge, I wouldn't be worried if you tried to do what that man said." "You wouldn't?" questioned James confusedly. "Not at all. I'm a West," smirked Quinn. "If you tried to do things that you describe as unethical, you wouldn't be able to move a finger. I would have been out of your reach before you could have even thought about what to do." When Quinn mentioned his last name, James finally recalled Quinn's full name, and then it hit him what Quinn was trying to say. "West, as in George West?" asked James, his eyes widening. He had only met George West a couple of times. He didn't know the man personally. But he knew who George West was. His work at Wizengamot, and in the political circle, made sure that he knew of the man who held a substantial amount of influence in every social and professional circle. James also knew that his parents knew George West. He sparsely recalled that his parents had been invited to dinner with George West a few times, and had a business relationship with the head of the West business empire. "Yes, West as in George West. He's my grandfather," confirmed Quinn, and that was why he wasn't worried. As long as Quinn didn't do anything wildly illegal or wrong, he would be fine. James was still surprised that Quinn was the grandson of George West, but then it dawned on him how dangerous things could have turned out. What would have happened if he had got severely injured or harmed? What if he had died, thought James in mild horror. He could almost imagine what George West would have done when he found that his only grandson had been involved in a potentially dangerous situation. James was sure that his life would have been terribly difficult for a long time. James looked at Quinn's hands and nervously thought, he won't make a big deal about this, right? He did that to himself on his own and isn't very bothered about it. So we are good, right? Right? While James was thinking about if he was in trouble, Quinn was silently thinking about what would happen when they reached Hogwarts. I need to handle this carefully. There will be only one chance for me to work with, thought Quinn. He saw the end of the tunnel. Let's hope he won't come out and stay inside. Scene break. Quinn and James, along with the unconscious Harry, entered the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey. I am here to visit, called out Quinn with a chipper voice. Both James and Quinn heard a sigh from the inside, and it brought a smile to Quinn's face. Quinn, it's almost dinner time. Why are you here right now? James and Quinn saw the matron walk out from her office. "What do you want to ask that couldn't wait?" sighed Poppy as she walked out while straightening a crease on her clothes, but when she looked up, she saw that it wasn't just Quinn. "James Potter? What are you doing here?" asked Poppy. She saw the former student and now Aura standing there beside Quinn, and then she saw Harry in his arms. "Is this Harry Potter? Merlin, what happened to him?" She walked forward and towards a bed that was beside the three. "What are you standing there for? Lay the boy down on the bed." James moved as instructed and gingerly lay his son on the bed. "Did you check up on him?" asked Poppy as she diagnosed Harry. "I did. Harry is knocked out. He was dropped to the ground. I think he has a concussion on his head," nodded James as he replied. "Huh?" Poppy looked up from Harry at James. "I was talking to Quinn." "But, yes, you are an Aura, so I guess you have some elementary healing skills." James looked at Quinn with confusion. "I was in a bit of a pinch, Madame Pomfrey. I couldn't concentrate with the pain," smiled Quinn. "Pain?" Poppy once again looked at Harry and saw Quinn raise his arms and show his hands. Quinn's hands had swollen from below the wrist, and the knuckles had turned green and purple. "What really happened to the both of you?" asked Poppy, shocked. Quinn would have waved his hands if they weren't hurt, but he assured, "Oh, it's nothing. I just punched a man and, well, this happened. If you're concerned, then that man was more injured than I am. In any case, all's well when it ends well." "I wasn't concerned about that," sighed Poppy in exasperation. "Show me those hands." Poppy looked at Quinn's hands and pulled out her wand to cast healing spells on the bones and swollen areas. The fractures in the bones started to knit back while the swelling began to subside as the color in Quinn's hand returned to normal. "Wait for a while, and they'll be good as new. Even stronger than before," said Poppy before turning to James. "Your son is fine. He will be up in a few hours. I could wake him up now, but let him wake up on his own." James breathed a sigh of relief at the assurance of the healer. "Good, then I'll go find McGonagall. She'll take me to Dumbledore." "I need to talk to him," said James. "I see." "Wait for a second," stopped Poppy and then called out. "Tipsy." A Hogwarts house elf appeared in the hospital wing after a pop. "What can Tipsy do for Healer Lady Poppy?" said the house elf in her squeaky voice and looked at Poppy with her big eyes. "Tipsy, where's Professor McGonagall?" asked Poppy. The house elf tilted her head and spoke after a short silence, "Proffy can't be in her office." Poppy turned to James and said, "You heard her. Minerva is in her office. You remember where her office is, right?" James nodded, and after saying a short thank you, he left the hospital wing to find the Scottish professor. After James left, Poppy turned to Quinn. "You're staying here till your hands are healed, don't even think of leaving before I give you my consent," warned Poppy as her eyes narrowed. "Madame Pomfrey, have you ever seen me trying to leave your company early?" "I'll stay with you as long as you desire," grinned Quinn. "I still don't know what happened. How did you get injured? And what about the person who you punched? Where is he? Doesn't he need medical attention? And why was an Aura here at Hogwarts?" rapid-fired Poppy, adamant about knowing what was happening. Quinn slightly smiled and narrated the events from his point of view, emphasizing his heroics that saved the day. "Thus, a visit to Hogsmeade turned into an adventure where I saved the boy who lived and the Auras from the Axionites. Not bad for a day's work, right?" beamed Quinn. Poppy stared at Quinn with her mouth slightly open and then smacked him on the back of his head. "Why?" exclaimed Quinn, not expecting the sudden beating. You knew about Remus being a werewolf," fumed Poppy. "You were messing with me that day when you brought up werewolves. Do you know how scared I was?" "Oh," uttered Quinn, and then a smile bloomed on his face. "Yeah, that was fun. I loved the tea. We should do it again soon. How about next Thursday? How does that sound?" Poppy raised her hand for another smack, but Quinn dodged it with a grin on his face. "So you don't mind that Remus Lupin is a werewolf?" "I don't mind. As long as I or anyone else isn't bitten without their consent," spoke Quinn. "Lycanthropy is a disease. I don't blame people who have it. As long as they don't try to spread it, I couldn't care less if they are werewolves." Without their consent, asked Poppy with a tiny bit of confusion. Yeah, people are stupid. If they went near a werewolf during a full moon intending to get bitten, I wouldn't blame the werewolf. Their instincts command them to bite. You can't blame someone for what they can't control. After talking to Poppy, Quinn sat down on a bed and closed his eyes. He needed to concentrate. He needed to be prepared for what was about to come. There were two possibilities, and Quinn needed to simulate how they would unfold. That's difficult given the fact that I haven't talked to him, thought Quinn. He had come to the hospital wing so that if the first possibility unfolded he would have an audience, which would restrict any possible foul play. And if the second possibility came to happen, then Quinn would need to be in a place where he would have the chance to gain back up. It depends on who will be the messenger. If they are good, I'll have a chance to explain it in depth, otherwise, if they aren't, I can still get the message across, but it'll have to be short, thought Quinn as he kept thinking about how things would unfold. Both possibilities had their own pros and cons. What Quinn needed was to think about how to maximize the pros and minimize the cons. Mr. West, you have gotten yourself involved in something big, haven't you? Quinn opened his eyes and saw his head of house standing there, arms crossed, looking up at him. Professor Flitwick. I hope I'm not in trouble, smiled Quinn, and at the same time, he thought, what will happen, though? You're in trouble, Mr. West. You're going to be in detention, sighed Flitwick. Now, if you are healed, let's go. The headmaster has called you to his office. The second one, it is, thought Quinn. The first meeting between Quinn West and Albus Dumbledore was ahead. This marks the end of part 41 of the story, Magical Journey in Harry Potter World. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.